All right. Thank you, everybody, for sticking through to the end. I don't think I've ever closed out a conference before. Okay. So one disclosure. So I do a little bit of consulting for Roche just this year. But I think the more important things to think about are, what's my perspective? And so, again, I am faculty at the University of Washington. I'm an employee. I actually don't get paid any more or any less based on how much testing we do. I just get a salary. I use laboratory-developed tests exclusively in my clinical practice, and I've used them pretty consistently for the last 20 plus years now. Lots of volunteer opportunities that I've taken advantage of. So again, I'm a chair of the Professional Relations Committee for AMP, participate in several committees, and I'm a chair of a committee for CAP right now. And then I've also participated with an industry group in this area. Just to remind you, University of Washington, that's the place that has the volcano and the pointy building. It's not down the street. For whatever reason, I've had so many people say, oh, you're at WashU. I'm like, no, the real Washington. So with that said, the other thing I have to mention is I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. I never pretended to be a lawyer. This is all just a really sick hobby that I've been involved in the last 10 years or so. So where am I going to go with all this? So I'm going to give you a really high-level view of the current state of laboratory regulations, just to kind of set a baseline where we're at. I'm going to touch on the VALID Act and just some of the really important aspects of it. And then what's going on? Things have been moving really quickly the last 6 months, and they continue to move very fast. And then what's next? So I think everyone in this room is probably aware that there's kind of a bifurcated regulatory pathway. If you're developing laboratory-developed tests, within your laboratory for use on your patients or patients in your region, or sometimes even as a company, that goes under CLIA and is regulated under CLIA and potentially by CAP. Also includes modifications of FDA-approved tests. I mean, we have to remember that a lot of these tests that the manufacturers make, they're great. They've been validated for particular use, but that's not necessarily the use that we need for our patients. And so we have to modify them to make them effective. And it really does address everything end to end, from the validation through the procedure and the reporting. It covers the whole swath. If we look at FDA-approved diagnostics, those are sometimes called IVDs. Again, these are generally boxed, sold, and shipped kits across state lines, and that interstate commerce is actually a really key definition. A lot of times they're black boxes. We don't know about the software. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And it really is the only thing the FDA is evaluating is the analytical validity of that particular assay. And it does include a lot of companion diagnostics, or CDXs. So, when we think about, what laboratory tests are being used for, it's important to think about this kind of schema. And so kind of at the center is that test and that disorder that we're testing for. And, the analytical validity, the ability to identify a particular analyte within the sample, that's a small part of it. And a little bit larger circle outside of that is the clinical validity. So we can identify a biomarker, how does that actually, impact the disease that we're interested in? Clinical utility is even totally different. So we can do all these great things. Does it actually make a difference to our patients? If it doesn't, should we really be doing it? Should we be, charging people money to do something like that? The way these things are kind of regulated right now, so again, the analytical validity piece, it's either under CLIA or by FDA. There's potentially a little bit of a hole here in terms of the clinical validity. And so, there are some potential aspects of CAP accreditation checklists that put that on the medical director and medical oversight of a particular test, but it's not codified in law. It's definitely not in CLIA. And then clinical utility, that's the payers, including Medicare or CMS, whether or not this makes a difference. If it doesn't make a difference, it shouldn't get paid for. Okay, so high-level regulatory outline. So what is VALID? So it's the Verifying Accurate and Leading Edge IVCT Development Act. I'm just going to call it VALID. And what this does is it's going to take both IVDs, so those boxed and shipped kits, and laboratory-developed tests, and put them in the same regulatory structure. And it's going to put it in the device center within FDA. So there's some controversy whether or not FDA actually has jurisdiction. It's a little bit of a gray area. It's never been litigated. This would put it squarely in their jurisdiction. It would put it into law. One of the key aspects is that it would develop or would break these tests into different risk categories: high risk, medium risk, low risk. And depending on what risk category was assigned to that test, so this isn't necessarily what you think it would be, but what FDA would think it would be, you'll have to do different things. So you may have to do a pre-market submission. So you would have to do all the data gathering, put everything together, submit it to FDA, pay a really large amount of money, and then they would go back and forth, maybe approve it, maybe not. Moderate risk tests, you would either have to use like a third-party accreditor or something called a technology certification pathway. If you happen to have a low-risk test, no review is needed. You'd also have to register with the FDA and list the tests on a website that is yet to be built. And then we'd also have to do something called quality systems regulations. And so they sound relatively benign, but the more I dig into these, the more concerned I am that there's actually a lot of work there, and there's probably even more work in the QSRs than in other parts of Valid. So we've just scratched the surface. There are a lot of exemptions. This is a great table that was put together by some colleagues in DC. And basically what you can see here is that there are exemptions. And so if you have a test online when Valid is passed, if it's passed this year, that'll be October 1st. That test is exempt from a lot of these requirements. You can kind of see that second from the top there. You still have to list it. You still have to do adverse event reporting, but the other pieces you don't. And so there are a lot of exceptions here, and the crafters of this law tried to do this to accommodate a lot of the use cases where there aren't commercial tests and there really isn't an incentive to do it. And so by having some exemptions, that gives a little bit of flexibility in the law. But again, the devil's in the details, because this is what we think it means, but the rules haven't been written yet. So if Valid is implemented, this is from a paper that some colleagues and I have put together, and it's in the review process right now. And so what would happen if Valid passed? Well, there's a couple of key things. So it's 6 months, there'd have to be a public meeting, and that public meeting would be discussing what our concerns are, et cetera. 2 years after that, the FDA would have to issue what's called final guidance. So this is kind of like what they think the rules are going to be that you're going to have to play by going forward. At the 2-year mark, there's actually a report from the Government Accountability Office on what the impact of this is going to be on labs. And then they're going to also have to start doing the notice and comment rulemaking process, where these are the rules that you're going to have to abide by. We can start making comments, trying to influence them, but essentially we're going to have a picture of what we're going to be playing by at the 2-year mark. There's also individual things like you're going to have the website up and running. Once that's up and running, you have a year to list all your tests. And then it's going to preempt state law. So if New York does something different than Valid, that no longer counts. Washington State, which has its own laboratory regulation agency, would no longer apply at that 2-year mark. Regulations will come out at year 3. Year 4, we'd have to start negotiating for user fees. So that whole process was happening this last year for devices and drugs and things like that. So we would have to negotiate with FDA what we're willing to pay, and they would also have to say what they think it's going to cost. And then in 5 years, so in 2027, this would go live, and we'd have to start paying user fees. Okay, so again, that's the framework, but how do you actually pass a bill? So I had to go back and look all this stuff up when we started doing it, and so I put a link here. Hopefully the slides will be available to people. You can go watch the the classic How to Be a Bill from what was it, like the 80s or 70s. Great, it's a good summary. The way it works essentially, though, is that you can pass legislation as a standalone bill. So this is a one issue, you vote on it, et cetera. They've actually tried that with Valid a couple of times. Valid Act of 2021 and 2022 didn't really go anywhere, and that is that. The other thing you can do is you can combine it with other bills. So you can combine it with bills that have a similar theme to them. You have with bills that have nothing to do with them. Or you can attach it to something that has to pass for other reasons. So this is just kind of for reference, and I'll say that Valid's had a really long history. It really started in 2014 with the FDA guidance that came out, and you could even go back further to like the 1990s. But Valid's journey starts in 2014, and basically there have been multiple iterations over multiple years until where we are today. And where we are today is MDUFA, the Medical Device User Fee Amendments. And so this is actually a program that was established back in 2002, and it's renewed every 5 years. And so what this does is this is an agreement between FDA and industry that the industry will pay FDA a certain amount of money for specific performance metrics. And FDA gets some things out of it, like you have to register your devices and you have to list with the agency, et cetera. But what's become really important since 2002, over the last 20 years, is that this has become must-pass legislation, because if this doesn't pass, the FDA doesn't have the money to do its job. So if we look at a chart of a couple of these things, so this is not just for medical devices, which is the realm we play in, but it's also for drugs, generics, biosimilars. And I think what you can appreciate here, the gray bar is how much the federal government contributes to this on a year-by-year basis, and the light blue is how much the industry pays. And so you can see for drugs that the vast majority of the money that funds the FDA comes from the PDUFA, which is the sister regulation to MDUFA. And if we look at our devices, so again, this is just the things that are IVDs, hip implants, like anything that is truly a medical device, about 40% of the funding for the FDA to do its job comes from the fees that the manufacturers pay. And so just as a aside, FDA has estimated, or actually they've asked for $500 million to set this program up to regulate laboratory developed tests and IVDs. And so that gives you an idea of what they're expecting. So we're talking on the order of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that are going to have to collectively be given to the FDA if this passes. The problem is that this is contentious. Remember I told you there were negotiations that went on? They've been negotiating for years on MDUFA, and they actually have what's called a statutory deadline. So that means it's in the law that they have to be done by a certain date so that they can fund the FDA and do all the other things they need to do. They missed it this year. So back in January, they missed this because there was so much contention. And then on top of it, they just kept going for months and months and months. So back in April, they were still, just getting a little bit closer. And so, they have to get this done, but it was contentious. And so they finally got it done, beginning of June. What happened was the House of Representatives had a bill, doesn't have valid in it. They passed it. It was bipartisan. It was almost 400 to, I think it was like 20, about as lopsided a vote as you can get these days. It was actually bipartisan. And then in the Senate, they attached valid along with a couple of other things, so cosmetics reform and dietary supplements and a bunch of other things. And they put it into this bill called FDA SLA, or FDASLA, as my senator likes to call it. So here's the simplified diagram of what goes on in the House and the Senate, just to remind you. So the important thing to remember is on the bottom is the House, on the top is the Senate. On the bottom, the bill that went through the House was passed back at the beginning of June, no valid. In the Senate, on the other side, they have a committee that marked this up. This is the HELP committee. Valid was included, and there were some amendments added that are helpful. But once it passes out of committee, what's supposed to happen is then it goes to the floor of the Senate. You have a bunch of debate. You can have more amendments. You can improve the bill. Ideally, that's the idea. And then what happens is that the two bills are going to be different as they're passed out of the two chambers. And so they come together in a conference. And this is a really formal process where members are assigned to be part of the conference. It's really time consuming. It's really detailed. And it's a lot of work. So you can imagine if these two bills are really far apart, that's going to require a lot of work. And kind of in the midst of all this, so this is the current FDA commissioner just a couple weeks ago, actually that was last week, saying that they're running out of money in the FDA. And so if this doesn't get passed, the FDA actually, because they have union contracts, are going to have to start laying people off, giving them pink slips. So there's some pressure here. You may recognize this gentleman as well. This is Dr. Gottlieb. This discussion happened 5 years ago, same problem, right? So this is a perennial thing that happens. So one way to circumvent this is rather than going through the formal conference process, there's actually something called a pre-conference. And so this pre-conference is basically taking the two leaders on the House side, the two leaders on the Senate side, putting them in a dark room. There may be cigars and whiskey, who knows. They come up with a deal, and then that goes straight to the voting, both the House and the Senate. So it skips all those processes of adding amendments and trying to improve the bill. And it's really kind of like, in my mind, kind of the classic Washington politics is what's going on. So anyway, this is what was happening starting in mid-June. And it was really interesting because I never heard about this before. I went back and looked at my old textbook because my parents keep everything, and this wasn't in there, right? So This was totally news to me. And what was really interesting is that a lot of the folks in DC, like, they couldn't even confirm that this was happening because it was kind of such a shady way of going about things, in my opinion. And then just a couple weeks ago, negotiations kind of broke down. One of the leaders, Senator Burr, came out and said, we just need to get this passed. We need to fund the FDA. He actually submitted what's called the skinny bill, so pulled out valid from that and offered that up as an alternative. And at the same time, Representative McMorris-Rogers, Representative Pallone, who are the leaders on the House side, said basically, we need to get this done, pass our bill. It was really well supported. And the problem is that my senator from Washington wants all this, wants ballot, wants cosmetic reform, wants everything else, and so is kind of holding on to things. And so what's happened in the last couple of weeks is that negotiations are a standstill. As best we can tell, these folks aren't even talking to each other. They're so mad at each other. And it very much reminds me of my kids when they were toddlers. And then, we have the FDA commissioner coming out and saying, you know what, we have some funding for a while, kind of take the pressure off. We can try to work through this. We'll see what that means. And then, again, this contention between Senator Burr and Senator Murray. Senator Burr is retiring at the end of this year. He really likes diagnostics reform. He wants to get this done. He did put in that skinny bill as a potential way to move forward, but nobody's sure, is he actually serious or is this a negotiation tactic? Who knows? So that's kind of where we're at. As of, it says as of earlier this week, I checked this morning, nothing has changed. There was still a chance it could change. It could change by the time I'm done. We'll see. So it brings up the question, so what happens if it's not passed? So short term, there's a lot of interest, and I'll get into that in just a second, of why this is coming up right now. And there are other vehicles for this to get passed. So other things that are going to go through Congress are probably going to go through this year. So remember, legislative session ends in January. We're going to have elections in November, and so that may or may not change things. We'll see. But Cures 2.0 is going to come up soon. That's a healthcare bill. This could certainly fit within that. There are appropriations bills to keep the government funding going. Those are must-pass legislation in their own way. There's potentially a mental health bill. So just this year, there's multiple other things that this particular legislation will get attached to potentially and could get passed. Longer term, it all comes down to what happens in the elections. So predictions are that the House and Senate may flip from Democratic control to Republican control. There's a general aversion to regulation by Republicans. If that happens, this will probably stall for a while. So we're not sure what's going to happen, but we will see. The thing I will say is that, all the money is on that this isn't going to go away. That there is enough interest in diagnostics that some sort of reform is going to happen. And so why is that? And I don't know how many other people woke up on January 1st to this particular article in the New York Times about NIPT testing and certain companies claiming to be able to detect things. And it's a screening test. We know that there are going to be false positives. Hopefully not false negatives, but the way that this was spun is it got a lot of interest that, these tests were wrong, 85% of the time for very specific microdeletion disorders, right, which kind of flies in the face of how we practice medicine and just general statistics for screening tests. This got interest from a lot of people for different reasons, though, because if you have a false positive NIPT test and you make a decision on pregnancy management, which is totally not within recommendations. We recommend genetic counseling and, diagnostic testing, et cetera. So a group of senators lawmakers got upset, wrote a letter to the FDA that these things need to be regulated. So we have public interest groups, we have popular press, we have legislators that all think this is really important. And then we have groups like the Pew Trust that is, coming out and saying that these are dangerous tests and they need to be regulated. We won't go into their methodology and how they get to this, but I'll say that I disagree with it and their characterization. But there are these environmental drivers. So COVID, I think 3 years ago, if I asked anyone in the public what a PCR test was, they wouldn't know. Now my in-laws who never went to college, they can, opine on, PCR versus, isothermal amplification versus antigen. It's great. It's a lot of fun. NIPT, that is a huge issue, and a lot of it is because of this New York Times article and then the subsequent fallout from it. You may have heard about monkeypox. We're seeing a lot of the same problems with laboratory testing again. So again, these factors are going to keep this in the public's eye. And then on the political side, FDA has been wanting regulation since at least the 1990s on this, and they've tried a couple of different ways. They're going to continue to try. Patient groups have gotten really interested. And then industry to some degree, and when I say industry, it roughly breaks down between practitioners and companies, but that's not entirely true. There's some on both sides. So it's not going to go away. So what does that mean in terms of us as professionals? What can we do? So those of you who are at organizations, oftentimes there's a government affairs office. I've become very good friends with mine. They're great people. And what's really nice is that once they understand the issue, when something comes up, they call you and say, there's this laboratory thing, can you help me with this? Or even better, now our GA person is actually an expert in this and can manage this on her own. Definitely contact your legislators. This is a really important issue. They need to hear from the people who are doing this, how that's going to impact you. Laboratory tours are really interesting. I didn't really buy into this until we had a couple of people come through, and it changes their whole perspective on what goes on in the lab. Their vision of what a laboratory does and what the reality is are completely different, and this has benefits for years, just having a legislative assistant come through. Professional organizations, right now, the professional organizations have a lot of influence because we're speaking as a collective voice. Your individual voice matters, but definitely work through your organizations. There probably are going to be alternative proposals that come up, so just pay attention to this space. And then engage your colleagues. This is a challenging issue. A lot of people like to ignore it, but again, it's not going to go away. So we need to have those tough conversations with our colleagues that are in denial. There's a chance VALID could pass. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty. I have no idea what the likelihood is. It could pass in this bill. It can pass, in the next one. It could pass in the next couple of years. But if it does pass, then we have to think about switching from this advocacy to this more adaptation and implementation. And so participating in the public comment process, participating in notice and comment rulemaking, the GAO report is going to be incredibly important in this because that's going to have numbers on what the impact is going to be. There is a lot of speculation that the innovation in what we do will essentially be crushed by just the regulatory burden, and that's for the most part it's a consensus. But how crushing the crush is, we don't know. And again, just stay involved. Okay. So, in summary, VALID it's viable legislation. Something's going to happen. It may be VALID. It may be something else. But my prediction is something will happen. If not this week, then sometime in the next couple of years. We don't know we don't know what's going to happen. We may know soon. So projections are Congress is out of session. The House of Representatives is out of session until the end of the month. The Senate goes out of session at the end of this week. They go back to their districts to campaign. Then they have to come back and actually do work. We'll probably know in August, maybe late August, maybe mid-September, whether or not VALID's going to be included in the medical device user fee amendments, that whole package. We'll see. Again, it's going to keep coming back. We need engagement. And then the other thing to remember is that there really aren't alternatives at this point. And so barring something else that comes up, this is going to be the starting point. And so familiarizing yourself with what VALID is and is not is really key, and understanding how it's going to impact your practice and your patients is critical. Okay. There's a lot of people I have to thank. I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll say that, I rely on folks in my department, at AMP especially. We have great resources there. And then some consultants I've worked with, and then one of my mentors, Dr. Ashwood. And so with that, we have a couple minutes for questions. So if you have a burning issue you'd like me to address.
Thank you. All right, the floor is open.
Okay, good. Now it works. Thank you so much. This is a really passionate point for me, and I'm very happy that the CGC invited you to come and speak to us, because I think this is something that really needs to be brought up. But one question that I had is, like, what is exactly involved? Like, I heard that some flow tests, like, who on my pathology team do I need to be talking to? Is it clinical chemistry as well? You know, I understand that obviously whatever we have going right now is probably safe, but, like, you know, I'm thinking about the cytogenetics lab. Like, is every fish probe going to have to go through validation, or any type of new culture media that we start using have to go through validation?
Great question. So FDA does maintain a list of things they consider high risk. So to give you an example, PSA is a high risk test. MMR testing is a high risk test if you're using it for immunotherapy. Screening tests in general are going to be really scrutinized. Flow for MRD detection is high risk. So I think you can imagine anything that's oncology related for treatment, high risk. Anything to help diagnose bladder cancer, high risk. So the thing is that it's kind of a smorgasbord of everything, and we don't necessarily have the full list of what's going to go on. Some things to remember is that if, let's say, you're going to replace something that exists with a new technology, so HER2, let's say if we move to proteomics, that's going to have to go through a high-risk pathway because there's an existing test that, quote-unquote, meets the needs. If you create something totally novel, that's going to end up being high-risk de novo for the most part. So it's going to be complicated. And so I would say that across laboratory medicine and pathology, if you use a test to help your patients, it's on deck, and it's potentially, it's going to be impacted by this law.
Thank you, because I feel like I'm hearing it a lot from my molecular communities, but whenever I mention it to the other pathologists in my faculty, you know, clinical chemistry, they're just kind of, you know, not really realizing what's going on, and that's really stressful to me, I think.
Yeah, well, and I think one other thing I'll just comment on is anatomic pathology uses a lot of immunohistochemistry. That has kind of a specific carve-out potentially in the legislation, but if it's for high-risk use, then it's within the scope. And so I look at all the things that we use to determine treatment, to determine diagnosis, which is going to determine treatment. It may not be impacted immediately, but it will be very quickly.
Great talk. So many questions, but just one quick clarification. The grandfathering, does that come into effect immediately when the bill gets passed, or is it only after the 5-year period?
So it's a great question. So it's interesting. So if the bill gets signed tomorrow, the effective date that grandfathering applies is October 1st. And so the legislative language is a test will be grandfathered if it's clinically offered before October 1st. What does clinically offered mean, right? Does that mean it's validated? Does that mean you tested somebody? You know, what is that standard? And the funny part is that we don't know what that means until they make the rules 3 years in. So you can be creating a test and using it, and then them tell you that, oh, it's not grandfathered anymore, you have to submit stuff. During that 5-year period, what they expect is that you're gathering all the data. You don't necessarily have to submit. If you wanted to submit a 510K or a PMA, you could. But if you bring a test online between October 1st of 2022 and October 1st of 2027, their expectation is that you're going to submit that on October 28th, 2027, or do a technical certification. And so, yeah, so anything you develop in that 5-year period has to be submitted.
I guess there's just so many complexities. Think about tests that are grandfathered. Kind of getting to what Celeste was saying, if you make any modifications, I mean, even if you change, you go to a new instrument, because FDA, at least in my experience, is usually, you know, you lock down, everything's locked down. Yeah, so, you know, when industry now retire your instrument, like what? So how do you envisage that shaking
We've done
out?
a lot of advocacy. So the previous version of the bill was basically any change is considered a modification. You're going to have to submit. So reagent change, formulation change, instrument change, all that would apply. It's been nuanced so that if you adversely affect the performance of your assay, you have to submit. But if you improve it, you don't. That's the current version. So again, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. You know,
I'm sorry, let's take one online question, and Dr. Konnick is going to stay for a while after the talk, so I'm sure there are lots of questions, so we can address remaining questions then, but let's take the online. Are all high complexity tests considered high risk?
No.
No.
It all comes down to risk to the patient. And so there's quite a bit of overlap between high risk and medium risk. And there's something called mitigating measures, which is, you know, special controls, the practice setting, all kinds of things that could down classify a test from a high risk to moderate or even to a low risk. And so again, that's one of the problems is that, you know, you may think that you have a moderate risk test, but if you're using it for a particular indication, now it's high risk. And then somebody who has a high risk test and others in a black box setting, if you're using it in an academic center, now it's moderate risk. And so, you know, you can just imagine that for anyone who's done COVID testing this last couple of years, the back and forth with our FDA reviewers is, you know, over something that's so simple, a PCR test that is straightforward. It's just insane how much back and forth we've had, and I can not imagine the complexity of those conversations with something like NGS or Array or anything like that. So it'll be an interesting new world if it passes.
Great, so let's thank Dr. Eric for this great session, and thank you.